Good morning, everybody. I hope you're doing well. I hope you're safe. I hope you're healthy. Welcome to week 3 of our online video learning. And today we're going to talk about everybody's favorite subject, communism. See, because last time we talked about communism, it was over with this guy in Russia, Vladimir Lenin. So today we're going to talk about the revolution of communism in China and what happens after. So this video will actually be in 2 parts. One part will be the beginnings of nationalism and revolution in China. And the second part will be what happens after China becomes a communist country. So let's get started. Okay, so you're going to have to know some important vocabulary words before we get started. So our first word is abdicate, and abdicate is when a king or queen steps down from their throne because they're kicked out of being king or queen. So for example, as sad Napoleon demonstrates here, Napoleon was forced to abdicate his throne in France. Remember, first he was kicked off to an island in Italy, he came back, had to abdicate his throne, and was exiled all the way to an island off the coast of Africa called St. Helena. So abdicate is when you were removed from power. Kings, queens, and emperors abdicate their thrones. The next word we're going to have to know is commune. So under communism, they have communes. So a commune is a collective farming community, meaning all these people live on one farm and they work together to create crops. This is very famous in China during Mao Zedong's rule as a communist during his Great Leap Forward, which we'll talk about a little later. So other vocabulary words that will pop up that you've already seen are communism, totalitarianism, the command economy, nationalism, the word purge, and censorship. So we've seen these words in different ways. You might just want to refresh by looking them up or translating them, but these are words that you will see used in our unit this week. So let's start with some historical context. Remember, historical context means we have to know what happened in history to make this possible, to make this event happen. So, here are some events that weakened the Qing dynasty and got the people of China feeling very nationalistic. So in 1912, the ruling Qing dynasty in China was overthrown. And there are several events that led to Chinese nationalism and a Chinese communist revolution. So let's look at what happened. So some events that weaken the Qing dynasty are the era of imperialism, right? Because European powers were taking over China, they were taking over Africa, they were taking over Asia, and they carved them up into spheres of influence and used those areas for markets and materials. During the time of imperialism, we also have the Opium Wars, because the British wanted to further weaken the Chinese, so they start selling them opium, the drug opium. This angers the Chinese, and they fight a series of wars called the Opium Wars. The Chinese lose, and they are forced to sign what we call unequal treaties. So China was forced to sign the Treaty of Nanjing, and they were carved up into spheres of influence, or areas where the British, the Spanish, and the Portuguese had total influential trade in that region. So during this time of imperialism, China's neighbor, Japan, fights a war with the Chinese because they want a little piece of the action too when it comes to imperialism, especially this area called Manchuria and a little peninsula called Korea. So China and Japan fight the first Sino-Japanese War, and China loses. They lose Korea, and Japan exerts further control over China and further weakens the Qing dynasty. And then in the 1900s, there was the Boxer Rebellion, which you might remember was this rebellion of hardcore Chinese radicals that wanted to expel foreign influence from China. They wanted to kick out foreigners. And they fight a series of wars as well, which unfortunately for the Boxers, they also lose. So a man called Sun Yat-sen arrives on the scene, and he's a nationalist leader, and he goes around the world asking for money to help with a rebellion in China. And he's quite successful. In 1911, there is a Wuchang uprising. It's in the area called Wuchang, and they end up overthrowing the Qing emperor, the Qing dynasty. So this revolt, the Wuchang uprising, leads to the Qing emperor Puyi to abdicate his throne. Little known fact about Puyi, though, actually well known fact about Puyi. During World War II, when Japan takes over the area called Manchukuo, they put Puyi in as the leader there. So because the emperor abdicates his throne, this leads to a Chinese civil war. So the abdication of the emperor leads to instability in China. Sun Yat-sen had been trying to unify the people of China, and he helped to create some unity, but when he dies in 1925, that falls apart. So the Chinese Civil War is going to grow between two main groups. One, the Kuomintang, or the KMT, led by Chiang Kai-shek. They're the Nationalist Party of China. And the Chinese Communist Party, also known as the CCP, led by Mao Zedong. And these two groups will fight for control over the area of China after the death of Sun Yat-sen. So let's take a closer look at these two sides and who might have supported them and why. First, we have the Kuomintang, or the KMT, led by Chiang Kai-shek. The Kuomintang was created by Sun Yat-sen, that nationalist leader we talked about before. They believed China should be a democracy, they were anti-communist, they supported capitalism, and often found support from the West. They were also supported by the wealthy and working class Chinese, the middle class Chinese. And they allied with the United States after World War II as well. On the other side was the Chinese Communist Party, or the CCP, led by Mao Zedong. Mao Zedong believed China should be a communist nation. He believed the government should take over private property and redistribute it or share it with the people. And he was supported by the peasants and the poor, and we'll get to that in a second. And of course, he was also supported by the Soviet Union. So Mao Zedong was inspired by the Soviet Union itself, and Stalin and Lenin, and he wanted to replicate that in China. Now, one thing that comes up often is, why did the lower class support Mao Zedong? Why did the peasants and the poor classes support Mao Zedong? Well, I think a photo says a lot. So if you look at the two photos of these gentlemen, one, Chiang Kai-shek, is very regal, royal, looks like a military man. Mao Zedong looks like a common man. Also, Mao made a lot of promises that would help the peasants or the working class. So Mao wanted to fight for the rights of the little people, the people that did not make a lot of money, the people that were at the bottom of the social scale. So people saw Mao as an opportunity to better their lives under communism. So here are the major events of the Chinese Civil War. So remember, just again, the Chinese Civil War was fought between the Kuomintang and the Chinese Communist Party. During the war, both the KMT and CCP do have some aid from the Soviet Union. They get things like military training, military leaders to help them out, to help them defeat these Chinese warlords that had control over little areas of China. But the big thing is the KMT and CCP disagree on how to best unite China. The CCP wanted a revolution led by the peasants. The KMT did not want the Communist Party to have any positions of power, so they start to expel communists and kick them out. And they form a non-communist government in the city of Nanjing. As the KMT forms this government, they expand their power greatly. They were very successful and pushed the communists back, and they get help from Europe and the United States. And during this time, they also modernize education, the economy, and the government, and start to encourage industrialization to modernize China. However, again, like we're saying, these reforms really only benefit the urban and the wealthy Chinese. The poor peasants feel like they're ignored. So one of the most famous turning points of this Chinese Civil War is something called the Long March. So the Long March was this event in 1934 where nationalists controlled most of the cities and began a new campaign to defeat the communists. So during this time, the CCP and their supporters and the peasants move northwest or retreat northwest to escape the KMT in what is called the Long March. As they march west, they gain more supporters, they gain more territory in these rural areas of China. And by the end of the march, Mao Zedong is seen as the leader of the CCP. It motivates them to keep fighting the war, and this will be the main turning point in this Chinese Civil War. And it really makes Mao Zedong this almost religious-like figure in communist China. World War II also had a tremendous effect on the Chinese Civil War. See, during the war, both sides actually unite. However, for the KMT, World War II will have a negative effect. The people of China will see the KMT as weak, they'll see them as corrupt, and they will see that they were unable to defend China against the Japanese. On the other hand, for the communists, World War II, in fact, helps them a little bit. See, because during World War II, Mao found ways to unite the communists against the Japanese. He found ways to unite the peasants against the Japanese, and this created a stronger sense of unity for the Chinese Communist Party. So even though the KMT and CCP were united during the Civil War, after, there's all-out civil war again. So both sides go back to civil war after World War II, and the communists start winning victory after victory and gain control over China. This is because where they won, they created reforms for the poor peasants and women, and they gained more and more support. The nationalists were seen as corrupt and ruled by a wealthy elite class, a wealthy rich class. So Mao and his supporters criticized Chiang Kai-shek for using American and European aid, and they saw him as corrupt. So by 1949, the KMT and Chiang Kai-shek are severely weakened, and they retreat to an island known as Taiwan and establish the Republic of China, which still exists today. So a major effect of the Chinese Civil War is that we have the Republic of China, founded by Chiang Kai-shek and the KMT, and we have the People's Republic of China, founded by Mao Zedong and the CCP. Of course, the effects of this are still weighing large today, as there are many disagreements still between China and Taiwan over the territory today. China still claims, in fact, that Taiwan should be a part of China, the People's Republic of China.